Good morning, everyone. How are you? Good morning. Excellent. Well, thank you all for coming this morning. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us for this session. My name is Sean Cordero, and my colleague here, Kevin Mazzone, and I will be having a conversation with you today about how to move forward with designing an effective user-based information security awareness program. During the conversation today, we'll give you an overview of who we are and just for the purposes of understanding where we're coming from. We'll also talk about some of the important pieces about the legacy awareness models and what that means when we're dealing with information security awareness, because in and of itself, security is its own discipline, as is the marketing and the pushing of the message out, and the education on the message it's also its own discipline as well. We'll then talk about a different approach towards information security awareness and how we have been successful in implementing different models in our experience. We'll then also transition into a conversation around policy and how that ties into your information security plans and how that then rolls back into your overall awareness program. And then we would like to have an opportunity to answer any of the questions that you may have. So, my name is Sean Cordero. I'm the president of Cloud Watchmen Incorporated. We're an information security consulting group, and that's all you're going to get in terms of that. I've been in this space now for over 14 years and have had the opportunity to lead a lot of different information security programs for some pretty interesting organizations, everything from biotechnology to state-like or pseudo-state organizations, and then in the retail space where I spent some time. Kevin.
Okay, well, let's see. I've been in the information security business for about 15 years, a little over. I do have experience as a former ISO and compliance director. And just so you know, I have a master's degree in information security from Syracuse. I am almost certified as CISSP. It's just going through that background check after you pass the exam. So I think that's about it.
So let's talk a little bit about the legacy awareness programs and kind of what the challenges are with that particular approach. So, you want to give us an overview of that, Kevin?
Okay, yeah. So the first thing I want to bring up is, excuse me one second. Am I okay standing here? Still in the camera? Okay. Is that traditionally when people look at information security program, they have the training out there and they measure for 100% goal. 100% of the employees take the training classes. And my point is that's not effective. You might have 100%, but people do the click through, right? They don't understand what the information slides are. So it's not really measured well. Let's see. Sean, sorry.
So one of the things that we also run into from a security awareness training standpoint is that the click-through, which there were some folks here that were kind of chuckling about that, because we've all sat there and you have to do the awareness training for this or the awareness training for that, and all of a sudden you're realizing that you're in the middle of an email and you've got the presentation in the background, because it won't let you click through for 30 seconds or a minute or whatever the thing is, because apparently that's supposed to make us focus on it. I don't know, but whatever. So on the security training side, though, that is the same kind of challenge, which is like if it's low touch and you don't have to actually interact with it very much, then what chance would you actually have of taking anything away from it that's of any value?
Okay, so I have this other bullet, lack of follow-up and accountability. There's, once you take the training program, you're pretty much done until next year. Nobody's following up with you about ongoing security issues. And there's really the training right now doesn't stress that the user is really responsible for security, right? So people who are taking the training just say, oh, IT department's responsible for security. I don't have to worry about it, right? Policy, right now policies are just overly complex, wordy. Only as geeks in information security and in IT look at them, right? They're not written friendly enough so that the line of business employees are going to look at them. They're inconsistent, especially between the different groups. Which I mean, all the support groups, besides IT, security, HR, and legal, they all have their own policies, and they don't account for each other. And then it doesn't work because it's just a punitive program, right? It's do this or you'll get fired. It's not like do this because this will make you a better employee, or this will protect you at home, right? Let's see here. Sean, you want to?
So a lot of the ways that we can overcome some of these challenges associated with the awareness challenge, not just on the training side, but also giving everyone an appreciation for why it is they should really listen in terms of what we're trying to communicate, is how we want to approach it. So the way we look at it is, what are the factors that need to be in consideration when you're pulling this together? Well, the first thing, you need to actually be able to show some sort of demonstrable change of behavior. If you can't actually effectuate and measure what those changes are, then I could say that the CBT training is just as effective as something like this, which is a little more intimate, where it can have more of a dialogue. I would have no context, however, so that would make it very difficult to be able to articulate anything that says that the program is or is not actually effective. It has to be targeted as well. We have to take a step back and say, who is my audience that I'm trying to address with the awareness training? The one-size-fits-all of CBT has been one of the worst things that's happened to information security training. Because what happens is it does not take into consideration whether or not the messaging or what you're trying to get across actually matters to the people that are watching it. Any of you here have a marketing background or studied marketing in any capacity whatsoever? Okay, so maybe you've taken a business class or something, and you read about Coca-Cola and why they're so effective in terms of their actual marketing. Well, there's a statistic out there that you see a Coca-Cola representation, whether it's one of their brands or another one of their brands, like every minute or something like that, whether you want to or not. So their branding is constantly out there. So when we say Coke, we go, oh, we're talking about soda in this case. And it has to have real takeaways for them that matter. Because if you cannot articulate why they should care about it, then why should they care about it? If you can't tell me why this is important for me and what this is going to do to change my life for a better exchange of information or a better way of handling what I do on a day-to-day basis, then why should I really care about this? And often we get that wrong. One of the ways that we can do this is through what we call, your regular general security newsletter. And sometimes that's like a boilerplate, hey, we have this information that's out there, and here's all these security vulnerabilities, and here are all these weaknesses that we've identified. And again, that can be detrimental to the approach, because if it's making a blanket assumption as to who the audience is, you may end up in a situation where it doesn't actually apply. You can't apply it to what you do day in and day out. So again, it's like a magazine. If I wanted to buy something and learn about fashion, perhaps, I might pick up GQ. If I wanted to learn more about music, I'm going to pick up Rolling Stone. I'm not going to read GQ to learn about what's going on with Aerosmith. It's not really going to be the right place. Security newsletters are no different, and it has to be tailored to the audience.
Right. So one thing I want to add to that before we get too much further is, I'm sure we've all seen in Sacramento or any other news station, every year around right before Black Friday and Cyber Monday, the news will come out with a report and saying, hey, when you shop online, do this stuff, right, to protect yourself. And we should, to protect yourself at home, like your credit card information. And that's something we should put in the security newsletter, right? Say, oh, by the way, do this stuff at home, so it relates to the user. It's kind of targeted towards them. And then say, oh, when you're at work, do the same thing, right, to protect our corporate data.
So you have now in your hands kind of a different approach in terms of engagement. So it's context, pulling the context forward, and then understanding who your audience is. And then there's the actual getting out there and trying to convince folks, because the awareness piece isn't just saying, here's a bunch of information about best practices for information security, go do it. There's the other part, which is I have to be out there consistently, I have to be visible, I have to ensure that folks understand why this matters to them. And then ultimately, you're selling. You're getting out there and you're trying to sell why this is a good idea for them to follow, not just to protect your organization and the assets of the organization, but also to be able to explain to them and show them the value of following this particular policy or this particular approach that might actually make their lives better. Some of the ways that we can do this in terms of expanding our reach and, again, visibility are very, very simple things. Things that don't cost a lot of money, and certainly they do take some time, but if they're well planned, it's something that can yield significant results. Something as simple as, hi, I'm the Chief Security Officer, or hello, I'm one of the senior analysts in the information security side. How are you? Let me tell you about this, let me tell you about that, brown bags, whatever the appropriate approach might be at your organization, are inexpensive but effective ways to do this outreach so people know who you are. So it's not, oh, security just sent out this message and they're saying we shouldn't do this anymore and why. It's very different if they say, hey, I think I just got a message from Kevin from security, who I know because I've met the individual, and they're doing this new initiative. Let me call him and find out what this is all about. Again, relationship building, getting out there so they know who you are, and you're just not like this faceless void of things that you should not be doing. Because unfortunately, that's what happens, right? You kind of sit behind the thing and you send out these massive text, documents, and all of a sudden people are like, I'm not going to read this. I'm certainly not going to do it.
Sean, before you go on,
Sure.
I just want to add one thing that Sean and I did, and Jonathan, who came in, at our last company, is we had a policy of clear desk, clear screen. You couldn't leave any personally identifiable information on your desk. And what was very effective to get people to comply with that, when we would do our audits, if they complied, we'd leave a coupon for a free cookie. So after a while, for spending $70 on cookies at Costco, after a while, getting people to comply, because after a while, there'd be the peer pressure. Hey, I got a cookie and you didn't, right? And that just got people to comply, right?
Back to the messaging piece then, if you're utilizing things like posters or other banners, what it actually might be to get that messaging out, if the message is not tailored to your folks, to your consumers. So for example, if I went in and let's say that I'm providing services for a hospital and I'm going into the ER unit, let's just pretend. And I go ahead and I create a security awareness poster about the dangers of not encrypting credit card data on their desktops. That doesn't resonate, but that happens. Folks will go out there and will throw security awareness type material out there in an area that no one cares about, probably can't even be seen, and then on top of which is completely the wrong audience. So the way that you can do that is by having those relationships that you're communicating with consistently, those individuals, those business leaders, so they can understand what you're trying to do, and it's not just this whole kind of scary punitive program that's coming your way, but also so they can appreciate why it's important to you as a professional and why it might actually be important to them. A lot of ways to do this is through security awareness newsletter. We've seen this in multiple forms, and usually it comes across in terms of an email. Hey, here's our monthly newsletter. And then we pull it up for samples from an auditing standpoint, and we say, hey, we have a security awareness program, and here's the evidence, right? Again, if we're spending a lot of time doing that, that's great if we can prove that it's actually being effective. This relation to what the audience cares about is really, really critical, because if you're going to have me read something that tells me, hey, we're doing this new security initiative, it's really cool, I want to know what's in it for me. I'm not going to read it just because it's great. Even if Kevin might be my friend, I'm going to say, that's great, Kevin. Where's the value in this? I'm turning it upside down. It has to be able to relate to them. So if you can explain to them and say, hey, here are some of the things that you might want to consider because it'll make your life at home a little bit easier. The dangers of malware and why this might matter to you at home. How to protect your children from phishing attacks. How to prevent, or how to actually get your iPhone back if you lose it. Those types of things that actually resonate to what you do on a day-to-day basis in the corporate space have to also resonate in the personal space so they can understand and it has context and it has meaning as opposed to don't do this. So Kevin, you want to walk us through what the various approaches are now?
Okay. So just to go along with what Sean and I have been saying is that the training module that we're doing right now, as we mentioned earlier, the one-size-fits-all training isn't effective, right? It's not targeted and so the way that we talked about this, and we actually implemented this very successfully at a past company, is really having 3 different levels of training. Oops, I have the wrong button here. Is that we have, like down at the bottom of the pyramid, we have a one-on-one type training. Everybody has to take this. This is how security relates to you and onto the job. So back in the hospital example, this would be given to not just IT people, but to like doctors and nurses and other line of business employees, right? But nothing too technical jargon because that's going to scare them away and make them just want to click through it. And then we build on top of that a specific one just for IT, right? Excuse me. I'm getting over a cold, so excuse me. Is we build on top of that one that's specifically for IT with the expanded roles and responsibilities of IT, like in protecting the infrastructure. And that has more of like the technical jargon. And then finally, all the way at the top, is we have something really only targeted towards the IT application developers. And this is like how to protect against things on the OWASP top 10 and like your coding and stuff like that, like SQL injection, okay? So I have 3, I hope you like the graphic, I have 3 real simple rules for training. Developing the training program, focus on the audience, right? As Sean mentioned before, you don't want to give encryption stuff and protecting credit card data in the ER to people.
One thing, Kevin, too, is how many of you have targeted IT-specific training? Okay, that's great. So is that IT training customized for your infrastructure teams, your service desk teams, and your application development teams? No? Okay, great. So one of the challenges with getting to this A level of customization on the IT security side, you can say, hey, you're a system administrator. You have elevated rights. Be responsible with them. That's really important stuff. But then the 301, which Kevin was talking about, this more laser-focused approach to the training, is often where we fall down from an IT security awareness training, where we stop short of saying, you're a developer, you have access to really important code, here's our code of conduct and the way we should be handling our data. And we stop short of saying, and by the way, here's how you avoid SQL injection attacks in your code. Or, hey, if you're doing a web page, this is how you avoid cross-site scripting. Or, hey, you might want to actually look at this from an SDLC standpoint and ensure that you've got the appropriate release management piece. We have a tendency to stop right around the 201 section and not ever get to the 301. So what that does is that if you think about it, if we have a policy that says no piggybacking, you cannot piggyback, everyone has to badge. We're all badging into the building, that's great. Well, you can enforce that relatively easy, right? Because you have somebody that sits there and might actually say, hey, I need you to badge. When it gets to the development side, the infrastructure side, there is no such thing. The best we have is either risk assessment or change control, which is kind of where we run into it, where we'll say, hey, you didn't do this or you didn't do that. So one of the things to really think about is when you're putting together a program, that targetedness, is that a word? It is now. That's actually in place, that you are very clear as to what the takeaways are for your development team or your infrastructure groups.
Right. Okay. And then just my second rule is keep the training interesting, keep the user engaged, because we've all been through pretty dry training or we've seen the teacher on Ferris Bueller that's monotone and it makes you tune out right away, right? We're going to keep users engaged. And my third rule and last rule is don't reinvent the training. Don't spend time. There's a lot of professional companies that go out and do this stuff. You can customize it for your company. One thing which we did at a previous company, when Sean was talking about the developer training, we actually were in negotiations to hire a company to come in. I think it was Microsoft. They do like secure coding training, right? And we were going to use that instead of us coming up with something. Just use something that they specialize in and they've done, and just customize it for our environment. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about training delivery. The traditional approach is always to do web-based training, is to have your employees do that. It's inexpensive to do it. It's great for upkeep and monitoring because it's easy to change, right? But as we talked about earlier, building a relationship is just so important. There is no relationship with web-based training, and it's pretty faceless, right? You don't know if it's Sean or just a robot behind there that's making you take this training.
It's usually a robot if it came from me. I don't.
Right. I've been at another company, and I can't quote this survey. I just can't remember it. But they went back and after 6 months measured people, the effectiveness of a web-based training, and it was like less than 20%, actually less than 10% retention on what the people remembered on the web. So it's pretty dismal. The other option, classroom-based training, it has a lot higher retention rate. That same survey showed that it was over 60% retention after 6 months. It's nice because you can put a face with the security department, and it's helpful to build relationships. But the con is we're all under cost pressures, and it's just more expensive. Right. So what I'm recommending, and we've also have seen this work very well in the past, is doing a little hybrid approach to it. On initial hire, before an employee even accesses the systems, which is required by some of the regulations, is do a classroom-based training. Let them get that warm and fuzzy. And then annually, we all have to go through a security refresh training. Since they've already know who's in the security department, already have a face with the name, that way we can do it with web training, right? Because that's less expensive.
Something on the classroom training thing to consider is this. So going back to the example with physical security, when you see something happening in a parking lot at your workplace, let's say somebody's walking around with a crowbar and they're hitting windows, you might either call the police or you might actually go tell somebody in the physical security space, probably a security guard, say, hey, there's somebody out there with a crowbar. Can you please do something about it? Now, let's think about that from an InfoSec standpoint. I'm a new employee. I walk in and I'm really happy to be there. And I get an email from HR that says, you have 2 weeks to get this training done. And part of it says, acceptable use policy training - security. Click this link. I go there, my login doesn't work, I didn't get the password. Oh, now I'm sitting there and now I'm nervous about it. I have to do this, I have to do that. I get another email that says, you haven't done your training yet. You need to get it done. Now, I realized later that day that I got an email that I had clicked thinking that it came from my IT management. And I clicked it and I thought, oh wait, that seems a little weird now. Like my computer's acting weird and I don't really know what to do. Who do I call? Do I call the service desk and tell them my computer's doing something weird? Oh wait, maybe I had an email that said I should call somebody. So I have a faceless problem with faceless training, and I'm going to call another faceless person to tell them that I have a problem that I don't know anything about. What chance does that individual have of being effective and actually even having the time or the care to report something like that? Because that might turn out that they just got infected with malware and it might be really bad. However, we wouldn't know because there is no security guard sitting out there that says information security. They don't get to see somebody when they walk in the building that says InfoSec. There's no such thing. So it's just something to keep in mind.
So we already talked about the pros, and Sean mentioned some more in his example. Just, I guess, some of the cons of it. It's a higher cost if you do this model. But like I said, it has a demonstrated success. We were able to successfully pull it off in our last company and do that. Sean, you want to talk about this?
Sure. So when we think about information security policy, we kind of tend to back into it. And this is the way that I've seen information security policy get developed, an audit. Do you have an information security plan? Yes. Do you have a security policy? Yes, I do. Do you happen to have a encryption policy? Oh, I've got that too. And meanwhile, in the back room, you're writing it, right? Anyone done that here? A lot of people smiling, so I take that as a yes. But really, it doesn't have to be that complicated. It doesn't have to be that reactionary, because ultimately, your policy is going to drive your plan, not necessarily the other way around. But you have to start somewhere. And if responding to an audit is the best way you can actually get it off the ground, fantastic. But what does that mean then? Well, you want to be able to get across, the first thing is the awareness and training, and ensure that it's part of your policy overall. So it isn't just a line that says, our employees shall receive security training, which might be what's in your policy somewhere. It could actually be more specific. Our employees shall receive security awareness training every quarter, every year, whatever's appropriate based upon the risk profile of your organization. It then also has to tie back to an information security plan, which then will create and the supporting structure for things like your policies, your standards, and the guidelines that ultimately are what your information security program is. Because at the core, your InfoSec program, even though it might look like event management, log management, it might look like server hardening, it might look like all of that, that's the doing, the hands-on button pushing. That's not security. That's no more security than a mechanic is a car designer. So they may be able to fix a car and get it running again, but they may, and I'm just painting with a very broad stroke here, they may not be able to sit down and create from scratch the design for a whole car. It's not their skill set. So I think sometimes we get a little confused and forget that, wait, the heavy lifting, the hard stuff when it comes to information security is all this planning and policy stuff that I don't want to do, right? It's too much work. That's the work. There is no other work. Everything else is upkeep. The policy, the standards, the guidelines, that's where the rubber meets the road, not in the button pushing. So that's where your procedures and process, though, comes in, which is, okay, so here's our policy framework, here's what it is we need to do from an organizational standpoint that ties back to whatever our risk profile might be for the organization. But here are some ways that you might be able to do this a little bit better IT. You know, if you're stuck in one of these antiquated IT models where you've got information security reporting into IT, you know, that's, sorry, but that's unfortunate. We gave a similar talk at a different conference about the challenges with that. But that being the case, though, what you could do is try to find a way to be a little more of a partner with IT and make their lives a little bit easier. So it's not just throwing things over the wall and saying, hey, go tell me when you've remediated all of these security problems, which is kind of usually the way it works out. Because now we kind of step into the role as an auditor, not so much a security partner. Well, something like a white paper that might help educate your IT is also part of your awareness program. If you can teach something to IT that's of value to them, just like if you're dealing it with your end users, they're probably going to like you a little bit more. I know I would, unless if you just came over and said, hey, you're not doing any of this, and I know you don't know how to do it, and I don't care that you don't know how to do it, but you have to go do it, which is usually how these types of remediation conversations come up when we find a vulnerability. So the first piece of this from an effective program standpoint is you have to have the plan. Now, what does this look like? Is this going to be War and Peace? And we're going to say, here's our business plan for security, here's what we're doing, here's our year-to-year spend? No, it doesn't have to be that complicated. It really doesn't. I've gotten away with information security program plans that are less than 3 pages, and really the only page that matters is the first page. Because if you're approaching this from the standpoint that nobody cares about your security program, number one, because that's a reality, because they have jobs. Number two, I have to show them the value as to why this security program will make their lives better. And number three, here's how I can help them, and here's how they can help me. If I can get those 3 things across, then I've probably succeeded in building an ally from the security standpoint. So we have to be able to have a document or something to start from for conversation, because ultimately it's relationship building. You're building a relationship with your partners in the organization, not just throwing things over the wall and saying, get it done. So what does that look like? Well, you document what your roles and responsibilities are, because if I say to someone, you're now the server person responsible for information security on that server, I go, okay, great, what does that mean? And I say, well, just keep it secure. How do you measure that? How do you even action that? You can't, but that's very common. In most organizations, you'll hear that. Well, yes, I have operational responsibility for security. Okay, well, what does that mean? I patch it, and I make sure AV's up to date. Is that really the extent of what someone's responsibilities from an information security standpoint really are? If that's what they think it is, then the security program is failing. And they're failing pretty badly in that case. So when you get this across through your plan, you want to have things in here for the folks that actually are going to be players. And believe it or not, everyone in the organization on some level has responsibility. Doesn't mean that they're responsible, they have some responsibility for it. And that might be as much as calling the security guard, in our example, and saying, hey, there's something weird that's going on. Maybe that's the extent of their responsibility, but they do have a role. Within that plan, you have to accommodate and include things like how we're going to do awareness training. Not just we're going to do awareness training every year. Okay, great. I don't actually need a plan for that. But we could say something like, we're going to deliver security awareness training through a combination of CBT and in-classroom training, and here's how we're going to do it. Something that gives people an appreciation for how you intend to achieve this. Not just a grandiose, we're going to do this every year because we have to because of PCI compliance, or we have to be compliant with a federal standard and we have to do it then. Making it very clear as to how you would do these kinds of things. And then that's where your policies start coming in, because your policies ultimately are the nail and the hammer from a building a security program. While a lot of what we do requires some very technical, hands-on types of work, ultimately, from a management standpoint, a strategic standpoint, everything that's hard is in the policy side. And it's because you have to actually engage the organization in a conversation that doesn't sound like you have to do it because we told you. Because good luck trying to convince a general counsel that your interpretation of a California statute, he's wrong. That's probably not going to happen. It's not likely to happen, right? Or you go to a CIO and you tell her, you know, I completely disagree with your strategic plan. It's really bad, and you don't have anything to do with security in here, so we're not doing that. Good luck. You know, she'll probably have you walked out the door. So again, it's a matter of how do you engage in conversations that make sense to them, and then ultimately is building these policy components that are necessary to give you the muscle and the support, because ultimately, where does the power come from an information security standpoint? What was that? Yeah, it comes from everyone, right? But from a pure play, how do I actually enforce? It's not just because you're the CSO or the ISO or whatever your role might be. Nobody cares about that. What they care about is that, hey, did you know that Sean and the CIO have lunch every couple of weeks and they talk about security stuff? And it just so happens that Sean mentioned that we're behind on our implementation, and he just wanted to know what the status is because he needs to report to upper management. I'm going to listen if somebody says something like that. Not, oh, well, Sean said go get it done, and now I'm going to go run off and do it because I really care that much about what he thinks. No, it doesn't work that way because it's all a perception, and it's all a matter of how you influence the folks that you've built coalitions with to ultimately create your security policies. Because security policies in and of themselves have no power. They have nothing. They're all built upon everything else in the organization. They're almost like metadata policies. Really, it's the metadata policy, the security policy. That's what you're dealing with. So Kevin, take me through kind of what the policy set hierarchy looks like.
Okay. Now, when we were putting together the presentation, I thought this was one of the best slides. But, as Sean mentioned, you have your corporate policy, right, from all your line of business units. That's pretty much the driver. And out of that, you get your security documentation. Remember the center circle on the last slide. And in here, it's still it's still standards, procedures, and guidelines, but it's nothing as technical as saying, something like for antivirus, it's saying that you will run antivirus software and it will be updated on this frequency, right? It's not like that you will run McAfee or you will run Symantec, anything like that. Because that's really the detail, and that's what the IT documentation needs to support. IT should have white papers, detailed procedures, and work instructions to say, okay, how do we meet this security requirement? What do we need to do this? Because in reality, security is just a consumer of IT services, right? We're not going to tell IT what to do. Sean pointed out earlier, is if we tell the CIO what to do, yeah, good luck with that, right? We're not going to last too long as a security person. We're going to get thrown out. So this here, I know there's not a lot of words around it, but this is one of the best diagrams I can think of when we were putting this together. Okay. And then I talked a little bit about the antivirus example. So just guidelines, some key points to keep in mind when you're creating your policy documents, standards, guidelines, whatever. Is we use the KISS principle, right? The keep it simple, stupid. Don't make them. I've seen policies that are 6 pages long that use complicated IT jargon where you really have to be an IT expert to understand, right? And who really wants to read a 6-page policy? You're not going to get a doctor or a nurse in a line of business to read that. Second thing, I already mentioned this, use general terms and avoid IT jargon. That's really important. And keep them short, right? Try to use as a general guideline a page to a page and a half at the most, right? And then also I've seen policies, again, these 6-page policies that start off by, you do this, and if you don't do it, you're punishable by this, up to and including termination. And there's 2 pages of that negative stuff. Well, guaranteed that's not going to get anyone to read the policy. So it's important that you have that somewhere. Just pull it out and put it in its own section. Because then again, you don't want to present the face of IT security as being a punitive program. Right? You want to... And then organize this like the training, right? I mean, you have some very general overarching policies. Then you have some policies that really apply to everyone. What we've done at a previous company is having a special like IT standards section and procedures that no one else needs to read, right? If you're a doctor or a nurse, a line of business person, do you really care that your antivirus is updated daily? No, you don't. You're not going to understand that. That's something definitely IT is going to want to know. So that's more like a 201 policy, right? But the 101 is everybody cares about document protection and not losing like in the hospital, losing patient data. Everybody knows that that's bad, right? Let's see, what else did I have? So that's pretty much what we had here. Do you want to go through the recap?
Sure.
Okay.
So when we're thinking about your security program, we have to be very cognizant of the fact that most likely, outside of your immediate team, no one else cares. And that seems harsh, but it's true. They don't care, it's not their job. So when we're approaching an awareness program as part of a security plan, we must consistently be able to sell and market what we're doing, why we're doing it, and why it might be a good idea for them to help us out to be successful in the overall execution of the program. Once you've actually done some of that through the awareness component, ensuring that the training in it of itself actually resonates with the folks that you're asking to sit through it. So it's not teaching how to securely code Java to your Cisco router people, which happens. It's crazy. It happens though. Or you're not sitting and having a conversation with somebody about how to encrypt their hard drives and why they should, utilizing the tools that perhaps you've provided, and maybe they don't even use laptops in their job function. Again, very simple to remove a lot of the excess and focus and target who you're actually delivering it to. From a policy standpoint, the hard work from a pure play security standpoint is in the policy and ensuring that folks realize that what you're trying to do is to effectuate change in your organization by pulling forth and changing the way that business handles the most critical information in your organization. And the only way to do that is through relationship building and tying it back to your overall plan. Because if you can sit down with me and say, what is it you're asking of me? How can I help? What is it that you need? The likelihood of success is going to go up exponentially. It's not just going to be, we need to be secure and compliant, which is kind of what it sounds like these days. We need to be secure and compliant. Here's your task list. We'll check in with you in a couple weeks. Let me know how far along you've gone into that implementation. That doesn't work. It's never worked. It will never work. It doesn't work in this industry, and it doesn't work on any other industry. Try building a car without a plan. It's not going to work. Security is the same thing. And then ultimately relating it all the way back, because remember, it's all tied together. Your HR policies, your non-HR policies, it could just be your financial policies, all have to tie back into how you're managing your information security program. If those things are not in sync, you're failing. You're completely failing. And when the security program and the security plans, the security policies become the spearhead, they become the spearhead for effectuating change at the highest levels of your policy, and that's the only thing that's driving it, I don't think you're going to succeed. Because ultimately, hearts and minds have to be brought to the table to look at it overall, not just in this very specific and unique vertical that we call InfoSec. So with that, we really appreciate you taking the time to come and spend the morning with us, and thank you so much for attending.